Hello everybody and welcome to number 27. I'm Jack and this is my Ferrari 308. Now I was really excited recently because Matt Farah from Smoking Tyre put out a video showing that he had bought a Ferrari 328. Now Matt is one of my favourite YouTubers, and not just that, but he's obviously quite a smart cookie. He's got a business store in cars, he's been really successful and I just love his videos. I agree with a lot of the stuff he said about this car, about how pretty it is, how undervalued it is. But one thing struck me, and that is, did he do the right thing buying a 328 rather than one of the earlier 308s? I recently had a chance to find out for myself. One of my viewers, Steve, has really kindly turned up with this really beautiful and pretty much pristine 328. Of course, the 308 was actually developed throughout its sort of life cycle from 75 to 85, so the later cars already had injection, a few of the features that this does. But the biggest difference really is that it's known as the 328 because the engine has been enlarged from a 3 litre to a 3.2. So the engine is one of the biggest differences really, if we're talking about mechanical stuff. On top of that, some of the cars had ABS. That was just the later 328s that had ABS, but it was the first Ferrari, I think, that had that. The gearbox was also uprated with bigger main bearings, but also it had a separate oil pump, whereas the previous gearbox was a sort of a splash feed one. Now, do correct me if I'm wrong, but as far as I'm aware, in terms of the chassis itself, very, very little was changed. So in terms of the settings of the suspension, the way the suspension is designed, the sort of, it's still double wishbone all round. So not much difference there really. Where you can see a big difference is both in the interior and the exterior. We were looking at it earlier, and actually it's incredible how quite small changes make such a big difference to the car, because really the main stuff that differs is the rear bumper and the front. And Pininfarina was asked by Ferrari to sort of make it look more modern and more up to date with the latest Ferraris, and I think he really achieved that. Now, a lot of people do say that the 308 is the prettier one of the two. Having come out, and I did think that as well, to be quite honest, but having come out today and seen this, I don't know, it does work really, really well. I think I'm pleasantly surprised actually. In terms of looks, I don't know. I think it's going to be a personal thing and you can sort of decide for yourself. Another big difference is the interior. And again, a lot of people sort of say that they prefer the classic interior on the earlier 308s with all the toggle switches. And certainly that does have a real charm to it. But again, in the flesh, having seen this, I actually quite like it. It sort of takes inspiration from the interior of the Testarossa, and there's no doubting the fact that in terms of ergonomics, it is definitely miles better. I see it does have a sort of fly-off handbrake on the side, which the 308 didn't have. Later Ferraris all seem to have that. I'm not a huge fan of those. But apart from that, as an interior, I think it actually works really, really well. It's different, sure, and I guess that you take your preference. It's a bit more plasticky 80s. It doesn't have those old toggle switches, but it's it works a lot better, and it probably is going to be quite a bit stronger as well. There are definitely certain items and certain details that are nicer on a 308. For example, the little door handles that it has just on the top there are probably a little bit more special than these sort of more standard. I don't know, actually, I quite like those as well. It's weird. The mirrors, again, some of the later 308s had this style of mirror. I think the original ones and the little teardrop on the 308 like mine are definitely nicer. But on the whole, this EU spec car still has the nice dainty little indicators on the side, which is really nice. And I do think it works really well as a design. If we talk about values, it gets quite interesting actually, because I haven't been able to find any 328s below the sort of 60,000, 65,000 margin, whereas there are definitely 308s on that side. Now that can be a bit misleading because of the various iterations of 308s. There was the first fuel injected car, and especially the American variants, which were really down on power, which are much less desirable, the GTSI. Also, in terms of production, there were many more 308s. So there was about 14,000 308s produced between 75 and 84 5. Whereas in its whole production, the 328, there was only 7,000 produced on the whole. One thing though that doesn't seem to be much in dispute is that the 328 is the better drive out of any of the various versions of 328 and 308. So I think what's left is I'm going to take it out for a quick drive and see how it compares to the 308s that I've driven, including my own. This steers really, really well. The brakes are really good as well. I don't know what sort of detail changes they made to those, but oh, this is lovely. The suspension feels a lot better than on mine. I think that maybe my shocks at some point could do with changing, because you can just feel the damping is better. As far as I know, they don't particularly change it on 308, so I think it's just the fact that they're newer and are working better. But the steering also just feels a little bit, it's hard to describe, it feels a little bit softer. It's not necessarily better, but it is softer. It's just the initial turn in, it's very slightly less sharp, but I think it's just the geometry is obviously different on this. Between that and between the changes to the interior, it's just shocking how different it feels to my own car. The engine actually, there isn't like a gigantic difference, to be quite honest, and I thought there would be more in it. Like a substantially different engine. It doesn't feel like it's got heaps more torque. It doesn't feel like it's got much more top end power. It's still very, very similar, just maybe a little bit better. So the thing with 308s is that in any case, from what I've experienced, they all feel different anyway. So I guess I'm not that surprised that in turn the 328 feels so different in ways you wouldn't expect. It would be interesting to know if they did change the spring rates or anything like that for 328s, or if they kept it all the same or changed the dampers. It does steer more sweetly than my car, and I think mine is a really well steering 308. So I don't know if they did anything different on that side, but it just feels a bit more natural, and I think perhaps that's just down to the geometry, the steering suspension geometry that they used, but it does seem to just work a little bit. It's different. Is it better? It probably is a little bit better. Mine's a bit sharper off center, but this has a more neutral feel. I really would want a steering wheel spacer like I have on my car. I think it makes a huge difference, and it's a mod that any 308 or 328 owner should have. The wheel is just too close to the front of the car. There's no reason for it either, so I don't know why they did that. One thing I hadn't mentioned is that the brakes, although they feel really strong, definitely much stronger than on other 308s I've driven, they also to me feel over-servoed. I don't like that. I think I'd get used to it in time and you can still have feel, but I don't know if you could see during the filming how much I was pitching about. I was really finding it hard to modulate the braking. Once you start taking corners a bit faster, because it feels a bit more composed normally, but then if you start pushing it around corners a bit and it gives you a bit more confidence than my 308, it then starts to feel the same, in the sense that it then starts to feel a bit wallowy and a bit, so it's quite interesting. At slower speeds it feels more composed, and you'd think it was the car that was, you'd think it was quite different, but then the moment you start pushing, it does feel, it comes back to that core 308 feel. So look, Matt's obviously, I think he's a great car journalist, and I'm sure he knows what he's doing. But what's my own personal opinion? Did he make the right choice getting a 328? Well, 308s have more classic appeal than this. It's incredible how these small changes that they've made really do make it feel like a much more modern car. And I'm sure that it's the most usable and it's the best driving of all the 308s, 308 series, the 328 is, but at the end of the day, it doesn't feel hugely different when you get to the bare bones of the car driven a little bit harder. I think it just comes down to personal preference. Do you prefer the looks of the 308? On the whole, I think I do, although I have warmed much more to how this looks now that I've been, I've seen one up close for a while. And the interior as well is much less of an issue than I thought it would be. It doesn't bother me as much that it does have all that plastic switches. It doesn't have the old style switches. It's still nice. God, when you go past those massive tractors, it's always a bit... So anyway, thank you all so much for watching. Really appreciate it. Please do subscribe if you haven't already. If you need to contact me, Instagram is the best way. Thank you so much, Steve, for letting me drive your absolutely fabulous and pretty much pristine 328. It's just awesome.